Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Tuesday morning and we are happy to be delivering you another fantastic show, I would say. Wouldn't you, Niall?
A terrific Tuesday, Robbie. Another what's that word? Alliteration was the word that briefly escaped my mind.
Yes.
Happy to be here to discuss all the matters of the day with you. So why don't you get us started with your radar?
Well, let's get into it. Okay, late last week, Attorney General Pam Bondi made an extremely interesting declaration during an interview on Fox News. She said that she is in possession of the Jeffrey Epstein client list. In fact, it's sitting on her desk right now. She's going to review it, and then she's going to release it. Incredible. Let's watch.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Okay.
The Epstein client list refers to the theoretical list of people who have associated with the wealthy financier who committed suicide while in prison under suspicious circumstances, to say the least. He was awaiting trial for charges of underage child sex trafficking, having been previously convicted of various sex offenses and required to register as a sex offender. Epstein hobnobbed with societal elites all over the globe, including Prince Andrew of the British royal family, Bill Gates, and political leaders within both parties, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, Epstein's modus operandi was to attach himself to other rich and famous people, offer them rides on his jet, nicknamed the Lolita Express, bring them to his island getaway, and ultimately offer them access to women for sex. And some of the women were underage, have come forward to accuse various famous figures, including Prince Andrew, of impropriety. But there could be other Epstein clients who have evaded scrutiny until now. Trump, to his credit, signed an executive order compelling the Attorney General to review and release these files so that the American people can learn what law enforcement already knows. Now, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder whether government actors who handled the Epstein matter have had a hand in concealing damaging information on important public officials. That's in part due to the sensational nature of the Epstein story. This was someone who engaged in routine, flagrant abuse of underage women and got away with it for years. But instead of becoming a pariah, he was welcome among the rich and the famous. Then, when he was eventually charged with sex crimes, he benefited from a sweetheart deal. In 2008, he pled guilty to prostitution involving an underage girl, but he was not sent to a state prison. Instead, he was housed in the private wing, much more comfortable facility, and get this, he was largely allowed to come and go as he pleased. They called it work release. And after that came to an end, he resumed many of his associations, including with Bank of America. Bank of America, by the way, is in hot water for how it handled payments involving Jeffrey Epstein, who made extensive use of the company's banking services. The New York Times reported in December the Bank of America filed 2 suspicious activity reports with law enforcement concerning Epstein. The problem? Those reports weren't filed until years after the transfers took place, and months after Epstein had already died. Suspicious. The American people have suffered a profound collapse in trust regarding elite institutions. One way the Trump administration can help to restore the citizenry's faith in government, in public service, in law enforcement, in national security, in the very structures of our society, is for more declassification of state secrets. Regarding Jeffrey Epstein, we want to know everything the government knows, no matter how damning it is, and no matter how embarrassing it may be for those in power.
Well, I think it's hard to argue with that, Robbie. I don't think that anyone really disputes that there should be more disclosure around Jeffrey Epstein. I think that the secrecy around him obviously engenders suspicion. Of course, if things were disclosed, we have to point out that not everyone who has ever met or encountered Jeffrey Epstein is a child molester or sexual abuser, but I think more transparency would be a good thing. I suppose, you rightly point out the fact that he had friends on both sides of the political aisle. And I guess the worry would be when Pam Bondi talks about having a directive from President Trump to examine the documentation she has. You know, in 2002, Trump described Epstein as a terrific guy and said, and this is a famous New York Magazine profile of Epstein, Trump says of Epstein, "It is said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Not a great quote, particularly with the passage of time and what we know now. So I just hope that if there is transparency around Epstein, it is across the board. And if that were the case, I would have no problem with it at all. I think most people wouldn't have any problem.
Certainly, we want it to be across the board. We don't want to see redactions in there because we could worry that it is just, as you said, redactions to protect Trump. You know, it's interesting, given that Trump did have this very long ago association with Jeffrey Epstein, that it is, and yet it is only the right, and in some cases the far right, for the most part, that is obsessed with this story. I'm not accusing like people on the left of standing in the way of having it disclosed. Right. And maybe on the left, there actually is interest because it impugns powerful people, wealthy people, the royal family.
Right.
But it certainly is not such a celebrated cause for mainstream people the way it is for the right. And I'm not sure why that is the case, given that there's potential for damaging information on Republican or conservative figures as well.
No, absolutely. When I see it mentioned online, a lot of the time it focuses on Bill Clinton, who I think certainly has been alleged to have flown on Epstein's jet. I think that has been confirmed, but I don't want to defame Bill Clinton just in case that's not true. Certainly it's something that is mentioned that I think his name appears on flight logs. So I think that's often the concentration on the right.
And Epstein bragged about being able to get a hold of Bill Clinton very easily, that Clinton would take his calls.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of powerful people also, you know, Bill Gates.
The Bill Gates thing is troubling.
Yeah, because he seemed to very much downplay his association with Epstein.
And it went on further. I mean, the Trump and Clinton thing, not to really defend either, but that was an association that was well before the initial conviction.
Right.
The craziest thing is the people who still associated with him after that conviction, including executives at Bank of America, which is a very suspicious institution regarding its involvement here.
And including Prince Andrew, and it was one of the most famously contentious parts of the famous BBC interview that he did, which has now been sort of fictionalized in movies, where he did retain that friendship with Epstein after Epstein had been convicted. And I mean, obviously that's very troubling indeed. Andrew did ultimately settle with Virginia Giuffre, who'd accused him of sexual assault in 2022. The settlement took place, and that again cloaked what had gone on in secrecy.
Right.
So I think that is one of the many ingredients as to why this is, you know, causes so much understandable public interest.
Yes, and you know, to be clear, not every single accusation of sexual misconduct or anything is later substantiated. Alan Dershowitz, who's attorney for Jeffrey Epstein, in addition to being a high-profile public commentator, was accused and fought back, and the accuser ultimately recanted. So it is important to be careful, depending on even what is said in these files, but I certainly hope we are able to, the public is able to peruse them, and the JFK files, the MLK files, all of these. If the government knows things and has known things for decades that it's not told us, just tell us.
Yeah, that seems like a solid principle to go on.
All right, we're starting on some agreement today. I don't know how much longer that will last. We're next going to discuss some confusion over an email. Are you being fired, you government workers? Maybe not. Yes, you are. Who knows? We'll delve into it. Stay tuned. There appears to be confusion among the White House and the federal government stemming from something so simple, an email.
Over the weekend, Elon Musk tweeted, consistent with President Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. Multiple agencies with Trump-appointed heads, however, are telling their employees to just ignore all that. For instance, the RFK Jr.-led Health and Human Services Department sent an email that reads, there is no HHS expectation that HHS employees respond to OPM, that's the Office of Personnel Management, and there is no impact to your employment with the agency if you choose not to respond.
FBI Director Kash Patel gave his own employees similar instructions, writing in an email of his own over the weekend. The FBI, through the Office of the Director, is in charge of all of our review processes and will conduct reviews in accordance with FBI procedures. When and if further information is required, we will coordinate the responses. For now, please pause any responses.
The State, Energy, Homeland Security, Justice and Defence Departments also told their employees to disregard. The Transportation Department, Treasury, General Services of Administration and the Office of Management and Budget told their employees to follow Musk's directions.
Sprinkling in a bit more confusion was Donald Trump. Here he was yesterday.
You have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government. So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week, what he's doing is saying, are you actually working? And then if you don't answer, like you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired.
CNN reported that one anonymous Pentagon official said, "It is the silliest thing I've seen in 40 years and completely usurps the chain of command."
Musk responded, tweeting, "Anyone with the attitude of that Pentagon official needs to look for a new job." Musk announced on X last night that workers would be given a second chance to comply, and if they didn't, they'd get the boot.
Some Republican members of Congress are voicing their concerns with DOGE and the email issue. For instance, Senator Lisa Murkowski wrote on X, "Our public workforce deserves to be treated with dignity and respect for the unheralded jobs they perform. The absurd weekend email to justify their existence wasn't it." Here's another Republican, Utah Senator John Curtis, on CBS's Face the Nation.
If I could say one thing to Elon Musk, it's like, please put a dose of compassion in this. These are real people. These are real lives. These are mortgages. It's a false narrative to say we have to cut and you have to be cruel to do it as well. We can do both.
And here was Scott Jennings on CNN last night.
I think one other point, and this is the push and pull of when a Republican is the president. There's an attempt, when a Republican's in the White House, Donald Trump or any other Republican, to argue that these federal agencies, federal workers, the bureaucracy, sort of can act independently or autonomously from the political leadership of the country. And that's what's happening here. That's why everyone is melting down. That's why the lady came on CNN today. They don't want to answer the email because they don't want to answer to the president. And the message from Trump and Musk is we have political leaders in this country and you got to answer to it.
Conservative commentator Matt Walsh wrote on X, "I already had a low opinion of many federal workers, but now that I've seen them all melt down and cry because they're expected to provide the faintest evidence that they're actually accomplishing anything with the taxpayer-funded jobs we've given them, I realized that my opinion of them was still somehow too high." So, unclear whether you're supposed to send this email or not.
Sort of semi-fired, as the president puts it, as a fairly vague term.
Yeah, I don't think they're actually fired. And, while I am, I think, becoming known for being one of the more staunch defenders of Elon Musk in the media at this point, look, he can't give directives, or he shouldn't be giving directives that imply people have to do this if, like, the own heads of their agencies, put in by Trump, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. These are people MAGA world was excited, was thrilled to get into these positions. I have a lot of enthusiasm for some of these people as well. We trust them to find the waste, fraud, and abuse, the weaponization, all the things Trump talked about ending. We have now put in those people to do that. So, let them cook, let them do that. Elon Musk, micromanaging every facet of the entire federal bureaucracy, trying to get them to send. Now, is it a big request? No, obviously not. Sending an email, but Elon Musk isn't gonna read all the emails from the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who work for the federal government. It's their heads of their agencies who have to go over that. So let's have a little bit of a delegation. Let's let Kash Patel, Hegseth, Linda McMahon, the people in charge of these agencies, deal with streamlining them. And if they're not doing a good job, they're ultimately responsible to answer to Donald Trump, who takes Elon Musk's advice very seriously, but that should be the mechanism, not, emailing Elon Musk directly is a little silly.
Yeah, to me, the striking point here is that this power hungriness or ego of Elon Musk's has now become so expansive that it's drawing pushback from the people you mentioned. It'd be pretty difficult to say that Kash Patel is some lily-livered liberal. He's exactly the opposite of it. I have been very critical of him for all the reasons that we're aware of on this show before. But when you have people like Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK pushing back on Musk's assertion of authority over the federal government, I think that speaks for itself. I think the idea that the threat of resignation would hang over people if they did not comply or respond to his email was pretty ludicrous. It was obviously going to meet with legal challenge. There were lawyers from the more pro labour union perspective comparing it to if I send you an email and say, Robbie, if you don't respond to this email by 7 a.m. tomorrow, you owe me $1 million, and you just don't reply, I can't really press you for the $1 million. I don't think. I mean, I'm sure you have it, obviously, but I can't press you for it. So that idea that Musk is pursuing just seems ridiculous and is understandably drawing pushback.
Yeah. Now, that said, I agree, obviously, with the goal of identifying which employees in the federal government are necessary and are doing good work and which are not. I increasingly think that large organizations, including the private sector, I'm actually not just about government although government is one of the, if not the largest employer in general, and is somewhat immune from market forces in a way that I think lends itself to having more bloat than necessarily in the private sector, although a lot of big private organizations also have a lot of bloat and could probably be more successful by trying to trim excessive employees.
Yeah, that is true. This comparison with the private sector, I think, works both ways, because look at stuff that Musk has done even in this relatively short period of time, or that has been done at his behest. We saw the firing of people in that nuclear safety agency and then their rehiring, the firing of people who were working on bird flu and their rehiring, the contention that Doge had saved $8 billion on a particular contract when it had in fact saved $8 million. The idea that a private sector CEO could do that kind of thing and retain the confidence of whatever, her or his board or her or his investors seems ludicrous, and yet Elon Musk does it in this quasi-government role that he has, and then people say, well, the government, private sector, I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah. But he did, and we're going to have a guest on in a little bit to discuss changes that have taken place on Twitter, but I always come back to the fact that he did fire 80% of the employees, and everyone said it won't even, the site will glitch out. It will not even function on a technical level. It still functions perfectly well. People don't, like the change, but those were conscious policy changes to change the level of moderation and what the experience is. The experience hasn't degraded from a technical sense, which suggests to me a lot of people could be let go in large tech or media companies with minimal threat to the viability of the product.
You're quite right that in the case of X, the predictions that the wheels would fall off obviously were untrue. It does still function, even though I would say the experience from my perspective is much worse than it previously was before his ownership. The caveat on that where X is concerned is these reports from various firms that suggest that the actual worth of the business has fallen quite precipitously under his proprietorship.
Well, we will discuss Twitter a little bit more later on the program. Right now, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has made an announcement about the migrant crisis, and also a high-profile potential opponent of his got an interesting endorsement we will discuss. Stay tuned. New York City Mayor Eric Adams had a major announcement yesterday about the migrant crisis.
Here he is.
Today, we are announcing the Roosevelt Hotel, which served as both our asylum arrival center and the humanitarian emergency response and relief center for nearly 2 years, will be closing in the coming months. The Roosevelt Hotel has been key in allowing us to effectively manage our operation, processing almost 75% of individuals that have come into our care through these doors. Now, thanks to the sound policy decisions of our team, we're able to announce the closure of this site and help even more asylum seekers take the next steps in their journeys while simultaneously saving taxpayers millions of dollars. With this closure, we're closing 53 sites within the span of a year.
Adams had met with Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, earlier this month. The two agreed to reestablish an immigration office at Rikers Island, a notorious jail in New York City.
Homan said the two had agreed on other things, but were keeping those private for now. Here are the two in an awkward appearance on Fox and Friends earlier this month.
If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, "Where the hell is the agreement we came to?" So,
I want ICE to deliver. And I want ICE to deliver. We're going to deliver for the safety of the people of this city. Let's focus on every American and New Yorker should have the right to have an opportunity and survive in this city.
We're going to hold you to that.
6 top prosecutors resigned this month after Trump's DOJ decided to drop the corruption charges against Adams. One of those prosecutors, Danielle Sassoon, said she couldn't ask a judge in good faith to drop the case. She felt the evidence against Adams was strong, and she alleged that Adams' attorneys had urged for what was essentially a quid pro quo, a de facto pardon in return for his help with the migrant crisis.
Adams' lawyer called the quid pro quo allegation a total lie. And yeah, I've been a little bit, more than a little bit, skeptical of releasing Adams from these corruption charges. I mean, I would say he should both address crime and migrant issues in the city, not because he needs to do that in order to get Republicans off his back to avoid the corruption charges, but he should just be doing that because that is his elected official role, is to make New York City a safe and prosperous place. So I don't know why we're putting our faith or trust in a guy who's like, oh, now he's willing to do these immigration things you want done because you're literally threatening him with potential jail if he doesn't do it. That seems kind of exactly what Haman was referring to there. Also, I don't know, so, and I'm just not understanding, maybe you understand better, what is accomplished by shutting down this the Roosevelt Hotel as a migrant center? So then what is going to be done with those migrants?
So the argument is that the actual flow of migrants to New York City has become a small fraction of what it once was, and therefore you can process them elsewhere and save the money.
So this is
that
a
is
sign
being given
that
to
we
the
have
hotel.
made some strides.
Yeah, but to your larger point, I think that there is this cloud of suspicion over Eric Adams, not just in relation to those charges, but in relation to the nature of the deal that was made with the Trump DOJ. That's why there was some talk of removing him. Governor Kathy Hochul was kind of publicly mulling that. She correctly, in my view, decided not to do that because it would just have played into Adams' hands that he was being martyred or the victim of politicization or something of that nature.
Yeah, I agree.
But the problem is that because there is this perception that the Trump administration holds this very powerful card over him, then anytime he makes any kind of move on immigration, there's always that doubt in people's minds. Are you doing this, to your point, because it's the right thing, because you legitimately believe it, or are you doing it to fulfill your side of an effective bargain?
Yeah, this just doesn't seem to be the kind of ruthless politics that Trump and Republicans are becoming more known for. Why not let a corrupt Democrat flail and bring more embarrassment to himself in hopes of, Republican political pickups in New York, I guess is what I would suggest.
I guess the idea is that he's a sort of useful token Democrat supporting Trump's immigration policies or immigration stance, I think.
Right now.
Briefly. Yeah, for the moment.
For the moment.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, in other news, one of Adams' potential mayoral opponents just got an endorsement.
Take a listen.
For me, the two most important virtues in politics are competence and courage. And Andrew Cuomo has the competence to run New York City in a moment of crisis, and he has the courage to stand up to the extremes of American politics, whether it's the far right or the far left. And so when it comes to confronting political extremism in New York, when it comes to confronting the crisis of crime, we need not a nice guy, but a tough guy like Andrew Cuomo.
Reporter at Reason Magazine, Billy Binion, wrote on X, Andrew Cuomo sent a bunch of old people to their deaths during COVID, and his administration altered official government data to hide that from the public, all while he told the media that people value the truth. Are people just going to forget that? This isn't a feel-good comeback story.
Fox Business correspondent Charles Gasparino wrote on X, Torres is looking to run for Gov, of course, Governor of New York, and Cuomo for Mayor of New York City. The city needs a whole lot of fixing. the way the laws are written, the mayor needs Albany to get stuff done. The mayor can't impose taxes or cut them, and a lot more, without legislative and gubernatorial approval. Their alliance would make running New York City so much easier if Cuomo does run and win for several reasons, including Cuomo made a lot of enemies when he was governor, and he and Kathy Hochul despise each other. Just before we get into the meat of this discussion, Robbie, it struck me that there are some people who listen to us on podcasts rather than look at our lovely faces, and we didn't explain it was Richie Torres, the congressman who represents the Bronx, who has endorsed Andrew Cuomo.
Yes, making that endorsement. And Richie Torres is a very interesting political figure, a sort of right-leaning Dem, or at least very right-leaning on Israel and foreign policy, which is what's brought him to attention sort of in a John Fetterman sense, and I think he has some of a Fetterman inclination to criticize Dem leadership or where the Democratic Party is, and has a interest, I suppose, in running for governor, is what it sounds like. Cuomo, is a figure who has been attacked on this show for years and years and years for his COVID policies, for covering up his role in the nursing home scandal, and was forced to resign in disgrace, actually over sexual misconduct allegations that, in my view, as I said at the time, were paled in comparison to the allegations of hiding, concealing data about his COVID-related stuff. So could he make a comeback? Richie Torres is someone who criticized him over this long ago, but it's I guess it's an alliance underfoot. It's sort of a Game of Thrones, I'm allying with these people to fight these people sort of situation. What am I to make of this, Niall?
Well, I think you're to make of it that Cuomo is obviously trying to position himself as a very, very centrist candidate. You mentioned Richie Torres and the pro-Israel position, which is very pronounced, by any standard. Richie Torres got about $500,000 the last election cycle from AIPAC. Progressives dislike him intensely, partly for that reason and partly because of a more general perceived centrism. In relation to Cuomo, I guess the idea is that he's been sort of billed as this is the person who can get the city working again. That was the Gasparino quote. To the point about COVID, for people who are not as familiar as you are with that controversy, basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Andrew Cuomo, while governor, issued this order that nursing homes had to take in people who had been let out of the hospital for COVID. And then lots of people died in those nursing homes, and the Cuomo administration essentially concealed how many people had died.
And that's the real, what I thought would have been a criminal part of it, because you can make claims about this was the federal guidance. It was not only done in New York, it was done in Michigan. Tim Walz actually defended having done the same policy in Minnesota. So he did kind of have an out for himself there and saying, well, this was federal policy, but he wanted that book about how good his response to COVID was. And the numbers of people who had died in nursing homes for the policy was inconvenient for his narrative about how good a job he did. And he ordered aides, people helping him write the book, to ignore that information, to conceal that information. That was the really, really bad part of it.
No, absolutely. And obviously if he does run, and there's some speculation that he could declare his candidacy as early as next month, obviously that is going to be relitigated in a big way, as are the allegations of sexual misconduct. Now, to summarize a very complicated story there, 11 women came forward and made some kind of complaint. Cuomo vehemently protested his innocence, although he made some vague apology for making people feel uncomfortable or for in any sense that they felt he had acted inappropriately. But there was only one charge ever brought, which was dropped before it came to trial. So that one is complicated, I would say.
I cannot stand him. I cannot stand Eric Adams, and it'll be an interesting mayoral race.
So it doesn't sound like we'll be doing a remote rising from New York to get you to see that race.
I pity the city that has to pick between the two of them. Next up, how one lawmaker is throwing shade at the president's voters, rather. Stay tuned. Conservatives are accusing Ilhan Omar of calling Trump voters all idiots, but was she talking about all Trump voters or just Republican members of Congress that she's had feuds with? Let's watch and let you decide.
I thought I'd seen everything, and I've seen a lot of attacks on you. But now you have a Republican colleague, dare I say, in the House saying to deport an American citizen, an American lawmaker, an elected representative. How do you deal with that?
I mean, these people are just idiots. I really, I'm at the point where it's become really hard to have an intellectual debate with any of these people, because the level of stupidity that they are displaying every single day is frankly embarrassing, not just in Congress, but as Americans. And the fact that these people are allowed to say just the most ridiculous things tells you that the dumbing of the United States has arrived, because how else do we get a Trump presidency again?
Hassan also criticized media for repeating crazy claims. Let's watch.
I do not speak Somali, and I'm basing this on the translation that he retweeted here. And this is guidance that we have heard from many immigration advocates. But Musk says that you are, quote, breaking the law literally outright.
Is it helpful when news anchors and journalists just repeat crazy claims from Trump or Musk or Brandon Gill?
No, I mean, and I think the thing that is unfortunate about the media is that they will say, Elon says, and they won't say, like, the judge said this is illegal when they're talking about the executive
or
orders
Elon's looking for fraud, even though there's no fraud
that are being shut down. Or, they will repeat these things. And I think, frankly, it is malpractice. And it does a complete disservice to the American people.
But Omar did have some criticism for her fellow Democrats. Let's watch.
People would argue that a Chuck Schumer isn't bringing the energy that someone like an AOC or yourself has been able to rally up. Is it time that the Democratic Party leadership hands over the torch to some younger, more energetic leaders?
Well, yes. And I would say, we had a Trump presidency where Nancy Pelosi was his opposition, and she understood the moment. And so age is not just the only factor.
The right blasted Ilhan Omar. Congresswoman Nancy Mace wrote on X, Ilhan Omar says Americans are dumb and hates free speech. She says it quite clearly in this clip. How do these people keep getting elected? Independent journalist Brianna Morello wrote on X, Ilhan Omar just called Americans dumb. I agree with her. Americans are dumb. We were dumb enough to let her in. Representative Dwayne Juncker wrote on X, Ilhan Omar is so much hate for America, we should have left her in Mogadishu, Somalia, so we wouldn't have to listen to her call Americans stupid.
Can I just object, first of all, to that last tweet there about leaving people in Mogadishu? I mean, that's ridiculous stuff, and completely aside from the point of what she said or she didn't say. I am glad that we played the full clip, the first clip, of the Mehdi Hassan question, because that clip was mostly shorn of the question on social media when the interview was being picked up by people of a conservative disposition. And the reason the question is so important, in my view, is because Hassan is asking her about a specific threat that makes no sense. It was Congressman Brandon Gill who had suggested that Ilhan Omar should be deported in a fundraising email. She is an American citizen, and so short of her relinquishing her citizenship, which she presumably is not going to do, she cannot be deported. So she is well within her rights to describe that proposal as idiotic and to push back against it strongly. Removing the question created the impression that she was calling Americans idiots, and we saw Nancy Mace and other people pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she was necessarily speaking highly of people on the right more broadly, although I will concede your point that she was not. It started with addressing the congressman who had said that thing, which is obviously not correct. You can't just deport people we disagree with. That's not going to work. She does say at one point, referring to, I don't know if she's just referring to Republican congressmen or, people on the right more broadly. She said something along the lines of allowed to say the most ridiculous things. And then Mehdi Hassan, in his question, also had a framing of, why are they, why is the media repeating things that people on the right say that are not true? All of that does trouble me, the level of, people are allowed to say things I don't like or that I think are dumb, that, speaks to this fundamental free speech issue we sometimes get into, that you may not like it or you might not agree with it, but in this country is a place where people are allowed to say things that are dissenting or contrarian or even wrong, and the media no longer has any control over who gets to speak. And I think that is broadly a good thing. I mean, I'm sure people on the right would point to any number of things that they think Democrats believe that are dumb or stupid, including on cultural issues, how many genders there are, biology, the vast attempts to pretend for weeks and weeks and weeks that President Biden was fit to be the president, and so on.
Yeah, but
and I don't think any of them should be silenced for thinking those things.
Yeah, well, you and I have had that debate, and we have differing views on the free speech argument writ large. In that particular case with the Mehdi Hassan question, I actually don't think that that's what he was asking. I think his point was something different, which I do think is very valid to ask, which is the propensity in the media generally to ask, to simply enable the most inflammatory voices by simply asking people to respond to all kinds of wild claims. So in this case, to be fair to Mehdi, he is asking her about the deportation claim, which is a nonsensical claim, in a more meta kind of way. But when people are asked, like, so Elon Musk says that you are whatever, some ludicrous claim, then that becomes the central topic of debate. I'm not sure that Mehdi's saying those people should be prohibited from saying that. I think he's arguing that the media shouldn't always just amplify the most ludicrous claims by making those the focus of discussion.
Yeah, but I don't think I agree with that, frankly. Elon Musk is making news. I mean, the media not talking about it doesn't prevent you from hearing about it. He has his own social media platform. He has his own, there's many ways to get around the kind of gatekeeping function that the media did. So, just pretending that provocative or inflammatory things aren't being said, it doesn't really get around it. And it can be helpful to ask the person to respond to it and suck the oxygen out of it. I just don't think pretending that inflammatory things aren't being said or believed is going to work.
That it may not be going to work, but the question is whether it is the most useful thing from a journalistic perspective to constantly focus on those things at the expense of anything else. Because then you have a media landscape that is dominated by the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. People on the right would perhaps say the Elon Omars of the world, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that the inflammatory things then become the central point. Anyway, my point, to get back to the where we started, is Ilhan Omar is being misrepresented here in what she said, that the comment from the congressman who wished to deport her is a stupid thing to say. I do find it amusing that people on the right are horrified that that she suggested that people are idiots whenever, Trump has mocked a reporter who was disabled or suggested that people protesting at rallies should be beaten up. So what she said is within the bounds of reason, and it is substantiated, and it's being either willfully or not willfully misrepresented.
Coming up next, criticism of X and online rhetoric from a perhaps unlikely source. We'll discuss. Stay tuned. Has X become a right-wing cesspool of racism and misogyny? That's a claim often made by folks in the mainstream media, but some contrarian voices are also sounding alarm bells about the state of Elon Musk's personal social media platform. River Page, a reporter for Bari Weiss's Free Press, thinks there is some merit to the claim that X, formerly Twitter, is once again becoming toxic. When it was Twitter, the platform was, in my view, often overly promoting of progressive viewpoints. But now, is it off in the other direction? Here with us to discuss is River Page of the Free Press. Thanks for joining Rising.
Thanks for having me, Robbie.
So why don't you elucidate your thinking here? And look, I agree, we're maybe going to argue about some things, but X has become, a conservative media property with a lot of right-wing voices, some of them over the top. Is that what you're focused on here?
Well, it's the fact that it's become a right-wing echo chamber in the same way that old Twitter was a left-wing echo chamber. And the problem with that is that when you're in an echo chamber, particularly an elite one, which is what Twitter is, everybody that makes culture, everybody that makes news, everybody that makes policy is on there. What it's going to do is it's going to all of the increasingly extreme ideas that become mainstream online are going to be filtered down to the normie masses through culture and through media and through policy, and it's going to freak them out because this is what happened with the left. So if you go on Twitter now, what you're seeing is crazy anti-Semitic uh, memes like Holocaust denial, stuff like that, stuff against interracial marriage, crazy stuff against Indians, against gay people. And this isn't coming from small accounts. This is coming from accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. And it's also coming from people that, are working in the government now. Like Elon Musk just rehired a guy who said that we should normalize Indian hate and that you can pay him to marry outside of his race. So, I think that the right is falling into the same trap that the left fell into, which I tried to warn them about as somebody who was on the left, former Bernie bro. Is that, I told them, everything you're saying is insane. It's going to alienate the working class. And that's what happened. And I think that's what's going to happen to the right now as well.
And what do we think about why they're actually saying those things? Because I get that your broader argument, River, is that it is ultimately electorally or politically damaging for either left or right to go to these extremes. But I mean, how worried should we be that there seem to be significant numbers of people on the right who believe things that are, in fact, flat out racist things? I'm not saying that everyone, of course, on the right is a racist, but the acceptability, on X at least, of expressing those views and the widespread nature of them being expressed, how worried should we be about all that?
I mean, if you're a conservative, I would say you should be pretty worried because it's going to come back to bite you.
Right, but I mean, shouldn't you be worried about it just regardless of your political disposition?
Sure, yeah. I'm not, it's often hard to tell how these things translate into real life. I mean, people were doing crazy mass shootings and all that whenever they had to go on 4chan. I don't know if it's going to be worse now because it's on Twitter. But I mean, I will say that Twitter sort of uniquely, it's the hate site, right? And I mean, I'm on it. I like arguing. I like fighting with people, not as much as I used to, but I still do it. And the algorithm on Twitter feeds conflict. And when there are no more libs left to own on Twitter, it's the conservatives who are going to have to start owning each other, which means taking these increasingly extreme points of view where things that like may have been more fringe are going to become more and more normalized. And if the people who are making culture and politics in this country are on there, that's going to become normalized to them. And how that uh, susses out, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've already seen, on the Republican side, for example, a return to this, like a sort of like gay bashing that really, even in conservative parts of the Republican Party, was sort of taboo. Um, after 2015, that's kind of come back where, people are just openly saying that they want to like overturn gay marriage and stuff. It's not a ton of people, it's not Trump, but that viewpoint does seem to be becoming more and more normalized, which as somebody in a gay marriage, I mean, I think that's alarming.
Yeah, look, I've heard enough people say this that, I'll take your word for it, or people who disagree on other things say that it's become more toxic in terms of the anti-Semitism or like posts against interracial marriage. I have not seen an increase in that kind of stuff personally on my own feed, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. I just haven't seen it for whatever reason. But enough people have told me that it is that way. But I guess, like, what's the remedy, right? Elon Musk very deliberately said, I'm taking over this site. I think the moderation was too aggressive. I think trying to take down too much of that stuff also involved in capitulation to a government that wanted us to take down discussions of Hunter Biden and COVID and all that. And so we're just, we're doing more hands-off moderation, and that means more people are going to say crazy Nazi stuff or crazy racist stuff or anti-gay stuff, and that's my commitment to free speech on the site. The problem with with it becoming more of a silo, that problem I take very seriously, but again, there's just no remedy for that. If all the liberal people want to go beyond Blue Sky, which is becoming the biggest echo chamber of all, like a site where geared toward the hunting and for blood sport of Jesse Singal is not really a healthy place either.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you do about it. If Elon wants to hire me as like an advisor, I guess I could figure something out for him. I don't know. I think if you are somebody who's on the right, and you see people that follow you, being insane, you can try to stop them. I didn't work for me on the left, but maybe it'll work for you. I mean, I think at the very least, you know, not rehiring someone who said that they don't support interracial marriages and think that hate against Indian people should be normalized. I mean, that would be a good place to start as far as tamping down the rhetoric. It doesn't mean you have to ban everybody. It doesn't mean that, somebody has to be canceled forever. But, you know, if you say crazy racist things on the internet, are you entitled to a job in government? Like, I don't think so. I think
Go ahead.
the right holding their own people accountable a little bit, to use, the libtard language. I guess that's as best as I can advise.
River, just one final question before we're out of time. Obviously, this piece that you wrote appeared in the Free Press. Now, I think certainly most people on the liberal side have come to see the Free Press as, I don't know if necessarily conservative is even the right word, but certainly mostly focused on what the writers and editors seem to think of as the excesses of progressivism or liberalism. What has the reaction been, either online or elsewhere, from the readership to this piece that you wrote?
Oh, I mean, our readership is like, a lot of them really liked it, actually. I think it was one of our most read pieces over the past week. So there were a lot of people who didn't like it. And I don't really care. That's the thing with the Free Press, is that we publish a lot of different viewpoints, and people are free to agree and disagree with whatever they like. If you are coming for like a straight conservative party line, if that's what you're looking for, the Free Press probably isn't the best place for you, because we publish all sorts of things. We like to hear from both sides. We even do these things called fight clubs, where we make people argue with each other and debate. And we host our Free Press debates. Like, we're all about different viewpoints. And so, I mean, maybe it surprised some people. It probably shouldn't, because Barry gave a speech at ARC in London, saying more or less what I said in my article, a couple of days before we published it. So, I think that, at the Free Press, we are dedicated to free exchange of ideas, and, we are extremists, and we don't really defend extremism. So.
Yeah, I did say on some podcast this weekend, I can't remember which one it was, that I wish the online right-wing people would go, like, everything has to be an 11 out of 10, when sometimes an 8 out of 10 would just do just fine. That's my similar advice to the online right. River Page, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Next up, Joy Reid's tearful goodbye to her show. We will discuss. Turbulence at MSNBC continues after the network canceled 3 more shows hosted by Ayman Mohyeldin, Katie Phang, and Jonathan Capehart. This follows on the heels of the axing of avid anti-Trump anchor Joy Reid's show, The Readout. She will be leaving the network entirely. Let's watch her tearful goodbye.
I've been through every emotion, from, anger, rage, disappointment, hurt, feeling that, guilt, that I let my team lose their jobs. But in the end, where I really land and where I've landed on today is just gratitude. My show had value, and that, I'm sorry, that what I was doing had value. And in the end, I'm sorry, I try not to cry on TV. And this is kind of like me on TV, so I apologize. And then it mattered.
MSNBC star Rachel Maddow went as far as to criticize her bosses.
There is no colleague for whom I have had more affection and more respect than Joy Reid. I love everything about her. I have learned so much from her. I have so much more to learn from her. I do not want to lose her as a colleague here at MSNBC. And personally, I think it is a bad mistake to let her walk out the door. It is not my call, and I understand that, but that's what I think. I will tell you, it is also unnerving to see that on a network where we've got count them, two non-white hosts in primetime, both of our non-white hosts in primetime are losing their shows, as is Katie Fang on the weekend. And that feels worse than bad, no matter who replaces them. That feels indefensible, and I do not defend it.
A source told the New York Post on Monday that staff working for Fang and Capehart were informed their shows would be cancelled, but the three hosts will remain at the network. Mulhadeen and Capehart will host shows in new slots, and Fang will stay on as a legal correspondent.
In other news, MSNBC's Jen Psaki will anchor a nightly show at 9 p.m. Tuesday through Friday, replacing Alex Wagner, who has hosted Alex Wagner Tonight for 2 years. This was announced in a memo from network president Rebecca Cutler to staffers on Monday. Wagner will remain at the network as an on-air correspondent. The massive shakeup comes as Cutler has been drawing up a new programming lineup to boost the channel's sagging ratings.
And not only that, Lester Holt is stepping down as anchor of NBC Nightly News this summer after a decade in that role. He will stay at NBC News to take on another full-time role anchoring his other show, Dateline. Holt wrote in a note to his staffers on Monday, "A smile comes to my face when I think that with Nightly News and Dateline, I have now anchored two of the most successful and iconic television news programs in broadcast history."
In reaction to the network cancellations, former MSNBC star Keith Olbermann posted on X, "It's such a confused, brutal, racist purge at MSNBC. It's like they're being run by Elon Musk." Reporter at the Washington Free Beacon, Chuck Ross, wrote, "Man, the white lady who took over MSNBC is about to get so much hate." And Ryan Grimm wrote on Blue Sky, "Alex Wagner, also willing to criticize Israel and Dems sometimes, is being replaced by Jen Psaki." Amazing. Lots to discuss here.
Lots to discuss. First of all, I just want to say, I know people who dislike Joy Reid might take glee at her cancellation or might mock that video that we showed there. I think that, and you, to your credit yesterday, say you don't like to see people losing their jobs, even though you dislike Joy Reid's positioning, let's say. I think that distress on her part was obviously genuine. I think that there is, the issue of staff losing their jobs who are much less well paid.
Let me add to that before we move on. These people have found out it was leaked to the press first, and then they had a meeting with Rebecca Cutler where she basically said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, you're all being fired." That sucks for those people. It does. I think there's no way around that, even though, as you said, I heartily disagree with Joy Reid. It doesn't bring me any satisfaction to watch someone tearing up about losing their job. If that happens to me, I'll be sad. Sure. I hope my enemies show me some grace. So yeah, it's not pleasant. Also, as I said in my radar yesterday, which you guys can watch for all the criticisms I've had of her over the years, I also have plenty of criticisms of just all of these people at MSNBC, including Jen Psaki, who is a again, seems like a nice person and did a fine job as spokesperson for an administration I don't agree with. But yet she has even less separation from the Democratic Party than Joy Reid or some of these other hosts. So that's interesting that that's the choice that is being made on some level, that what we need is someone who is more proximate to the Biden administration. You can't get more proximate to the Biden administration than Jen Psaki. So that's an interesting choice. Now, in terms of
let me just take up that for a brief moment, because I agreed with you, and then you added some words that I was like, oh, I shouldn't have agreed to that. you were like, oh, I don't like any of these people. And I thought you were going to say on cable news or in prime time, and then you said on MSNBC. I mean, Fox, for example, we have previously discussed them giving a show to Lara Trump. There are lots of people on there who are effective, by which I mean in reality they are just simply spokespeople for President Trump. The point is, I think, that one of the issues that perhaps we share about cable news generally is its propensity simply to preach to the choir all the time and to function propagandistically rather than journalistically. So I would make that argument across the board, particularly when it comes to primetime. I think there are some genuinely good anchors who are more on the newsy side of all those networks.
Yes, I agree with that. I know I've criticized Jonathan Capehart in the past. I can't actually remember for the life of me why, and I couldn't figure it out. So I'll let him off the hook for now.
Capehart and I are very distant cousins, which is a whole other.
Really?
Yeah, but that's a whole other. That's a whole other
funny.
question. Which
Rachel Maddow's point about making the network look less diverse is, not that is not something I'm inclined to agree with. That just having more representation of different ethnicities is something I criticize in a lot of other contexts. And in fact, if they were becoming less skin color diverse while also empowering more interesting, provocative, out-of-the-box thinkers, I would be all for it. Now, if they're just replacing people with the likes of Jen Psaki and it's actually becoming less ideologically diverse, then I think that's a bad thing. I wanted to ask you about the particular, I saw some left people, and I think there were comments elsewhere made by Joy Reid about talking about Palestine and Gaza, and it's like, are the people who are most inclined to speak out about that being silenced? I know a lot of people on the left were making that contention. I'm not dismissing that contention. That could be valid. I don't personally remember Joy Reid speaking out on that issue quite a lot, but I could just be wrong about that. Maybe she did, or relative to the other people on MSNBC, maybe she did. But I saw that there's definitely a perception on the left that more Israel critical or foreign policy dissenting left progressive voices on those fronts are being extinguished.
Well, on the whole MSNBC shakeup, I tweeted last night that the one that saddens me most is Ayman Mohyeddin losing his own show. Now, he will be a co-anchor, as we noted, in this weekend kind of multi-host show, but I think he was very much to the fore on that topic. And I think Joy Reid, to be fair, did make more reference on it than perhaps we were accustomed to in weekday primetime. But Ayman, not only on that topic, but particularly on that topic, was, I think, an important voice. And I think it is very unfortunate that that voice has been at least muted, if not entirely.
Right. Some of this is just a shuffle. Joy Reid is actually being dismissed rather abruptly from the network. The other people are just kind of being rearranged. This sort of rearranging happens on CNN all the time. It happens on Fox too. They've rearranged their lineup a bunch. So to some extent, it just sounds to me like new person in charge wanted to rearrange things, because often new people come in and do that, and sometimes it works out, and a lot of times there's no rhyme or reason to it, and you should have left things perfectly alone. Not everyone in charge of media companies has any idea what they're doing. So
no, and I mean, I do get the criticism in terms of diversity, but then to your point, I mean, Joy Reid's show has been replaced by a show co-hosted by Simone Sanders, who's black, Michael Steele, who's black, and Alicia Menendez, who's Latina. So I don't know how.
And Simone Sanders doesn't even have a. And I'm not saying they're similar because they're both black women, but it does actually have a pretty similar perspective to Joy Reid. So it's not even that they necessarily wanted that perspective. I don't know. I don't quite understand why they made this decision, but or this series of decisions, but they have, and we'll have to see how that affects the network's in the tank ratings. I know that's what they are.
The ratings are improving slightly. Not soaring just yet, but they've recovered slightly.
Not soaring. Up next, we will discuss the latest Harris X poll showing Trump's popularity is actually on the rise. Stay tuned. A new Harvard Caps Harris X poll reveals that 58% of voters are more satisfied with President Trump's performance over that of his predecessor, Joe Biden. There also seems to be a lot of support, 72% of those polled, for an agency that is focused on government efficiency initiatives. Lots more juicy findings as well. Here with us now to discuss them is the CEO of HarrisX, Triton Nesho. Welcome back to Rising.
Thank you for having me back.
Great to be with you. So I think the perception from some in the media, or at least the line that they've been promoting, is that the things Trump and Elon Musk have done, the dramatic things in the last month, are going to cause an ebbing of the popularity of the new administration. What are your findings with respect to how people feel about what Trump and Musk are doing so far?
Sure. So we tested all of President Trump's decisions and initiatives within the first 30 days in the office. And we found 3/4 of the voting public support the initiative to review government spending and cut down costs where those costs need to be cut down or are warranted. And so that's overwhelming support. It's the second highest rating policy undertaken in the first 30 days, second only to deporting illegal immigrants that have criminal backgrounds or have committed criminal acts. And the reason for that is because 2/3 of voters today are very concerned about the level of the federal debt. And they would much rather reduce government expenditures rather than increase taxes. 83% actually side on reducing expenditures over increasing taxes. And voters are very conscious that, that requires a full examination of all government expenditures. They're less focused on which agencies are being impacted at this specific stage and much more focused on the goal of cutting down $1 trillion or more of expenditures, which is, aligned with what Musk and Trump have communicated so far.
Dritan, the overall job approval rating for President Trump in your poll is 52%. And I noticed that on the 538 average, it's a few points lower than that, 48%. But, those disparities or differences in polls, that's not unusual. I'm not casting any aspersion on your finding. But does the Harris poll go back far enough to know where other presidents stood at this point in their presidency?
So I'll talk about Trump specifically, compare him to his first term. This is the highest job approval rating had as president in the first term, and obviously since the beginning of the second term. And the approval is trudging in the right direction. We'll see in the next 30 to 60 days, within sort of the honeymoon period of the first 100 days, whether or not he's able to crystallize it into a positive 50% and over type approval. And that will be quite the accomplishment. Trump has always been a high floor, low ceiling type politician when it comes to his approval and his favorability, meaning that his base of voters and a segment of independents have really liked what he has done, and the other voters have not. And this would be the first time that he would be on a sustained basis with a high approval, 50% plus approval. So right now, what we can conclude from the polling is that voters are giving the president the chance at a honeymoon, which perhaps he didn't have the first time around as president. And secondly, they've adopted a wait and see approach. They want to see what these actions yield by way of dividends and accomplishments before they make up their mind whether they're net positive on his job approval or, slide down below 50%.
But I'm not trying to be awkward here. I'm just curious, did you test Biden's approval rating at this point in his presidency?
We did, yes. And Biden's approval ratings at this point in his presidency were higher. I mean, he started off with approvals in the upper 50s, lower 60s, and had an incredible collapse right after the, you can call it Afghanistan debacle. He dropped a solid 10 to 15 points and never really recovered after that. That's the first time that American voters really thought of Biden and his age and his judgments and started to question it in a comprehensive way. We did ask the question that Robbie mentioned, which is, at this stage, are you more satisfied with the work that Trump is doing as president or Biden did as president? And 58% said that they're more satisfied with Trump. Trump also has a net positive favorability, 50% overall favorability personally, and he's net positive by 9 points. That's one of the biggest net positive spreads that he's ever had. Whereas, if memory serves me right, Biden is negative 24 points in his favorability ratings. So what you're seeing right now is a reassessment of the Biden presidency, especially the last year where there wasn't a lot of movement and a lot of action, and Trump's very, very fast and very, very furious start right off the gate this first 30 days. And voters like the engagement.
And what I find interesting is that it's the support for Trump policies you found in this poll was even higher than support for Trump himself. For the most part, you found that of 11 Trump policies you tested, all of them except one received majority support. The one that didn't was renaming the Gulf of Mexico. Very popular among extremely MAGA people, but not maybe the general electorate. But then the highest performing policy with 81% support, deportation of illegal immigrants who committed other crimes. What lessons can we learn from the popularity of these policy proposals?
I mean, the Trump agenda is wildly popular. As you said, there's few exceptions to it. One of the exceptions is birthright citizenship. So we asked about birthright citizenship in our poll, and voters break against Trump on the birthright citizenship question. A majority think that children who have been born in the U.S. to illegal immigrant parents should be given a pathway to citizenship. And actually, close to 3/4 believe that this is a constitutional requirement. So the public likes the birthright citizenship from what we can say, and they don't like renaming the Gulf of Mexico, but everything else, overwhelming approval. There isn't a specific issue that Trump is pushing forward that doesn't have, close to 60% approval, and in some cases over 80% approval, right? So that's the range. I will add one other thing, though. There are cautionary notes in this poll. There's cautionary notes in terms of Trump's trade policy and the tariff. There are cautionary notes in terms of how he's trying to engineer an end to the war between Ukraine and Russia. And there's cautionary notes also in terms of his statements vis-a-vis Gaza and the Israel-Hamas war. So the poll is not all rosy, and that's where you basically see the public adopting that wait and see attitude. Like, let's see what happens. There's some things that they like, there's some things that they don't like. And so far they like the energy, but they're waiting to make up their mind more comprehensively.
Triton Nesho, thank you so much for joining Rising today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, last but not least, a war of words, hopefully it just remains a war of words, between Tucker Carlson and Dan Crenshaw. Beef between Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw and journalist Tucker Carlson just got a lot more serious.
Here's Crenshaw in an interview with GB News yesterday.
Just coming back to this $100 billion to Ukraine, I know that people like Tucker Carlson will make the argument that there's a real opportunity cost there. We could have spent that money on the border or fixing, issues in America. Yeah. What do you make of that argument that all this money could have been spent to help Americans and not Ukrainians?
Well, you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. We spend 75-80% of our budget on a welfare state in America, on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I would love to ask Tucker what he thinks that $100 billion should be spent on, and if he would vote for it as a conservative. Tucker doesn't know what he's talking about. Tucker likes to visit Moscow and talk about how great the grocery stores are. So I don't really take his advice very seriously.
Then, once the interview was over, this hot mic moment happened.
Have you ever met Tucker?
We've talked a lot. If I ever meet him, I'll probably kill him. He's the worst person.
Now, if you couldn't catch that last part of the soundbite, a GB News reporter interviewing Dan Crenshaw tweeted, Crenshaw, quote, told me when I laughed it wasn't a joke. The British outlet later deleted the video.
Carlson responded to these comments, writing on X, "Why don't you come sit for an interview and we'll see how you do. I'll send you my address, Dan Crenshaw."
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene then chimed in, writing, Dan Crenshaw, did you threaten to kill my friend Tucker Carlson? Crenshaw responded, lol, no. There was a community note added to Crenshaw's tweet that linked to the video of Crenshaw's hot mic moment. Crenshaw and Carlson have a long-standing beef, especially on the Ukraine war issue. In 2024, Tucker posted an episode of his show on X captioning, why do the reddest states produce the dumbest, most liberal Republicans? Why aren't John Cornyn and Dan Crenshaw bagging groceries at Walmart? Jesse Kelly has thoughts about this.
To that tweet, Crenshaw responded on X, why aren't you bagging groceries in Moscow? A reference to Tucker Carlson's trip to Russia, I guess. Carlson had also called Crenshaw Eye Patch McCain in 2022 after Crenshaw voted for more than $40 billion in Ukrainian aid. That nickname, naturally enough, drew some backlash.
Co-chair of the GOP Youth Advisory Council, CJ Pearson, wrote on X, I don't think there's a single politician in America who squandered their opportunity to achieve greatness more Then Dan Crenshaw, he ran on changing D.C., but instead let D.C. change him. Sad to see.
Washington Examiner senior writer David Harsanyi wrote, Vance's military service is sacred, but Crenshaw, who joined SEAL Team 3, won a bunch of medals and lost an eye in combat, can be mocked by Tucker and called a traitor.
David was objecting, obviously,
yes.
to that the kind of opprobrium that Dan Crenshaw gets from conservatives. So Crenshaw and Tucker have a long-running feud at this point, a lot of mutual animosity on both sides. While I respect his service, I disagree very heartily with Dan Crenshaw on his foreign policy. I do think there is a tendency in the more neoconservative faction of the Republican Party, of which Dan Crenshaw is a member, to be all too eager to spend money overseas and be pinching pennies at home, and that this is inconsistent, and Tucker Carlson has rightly attacked it. I obviously don't agree with everything Tucker Carlson has ever said, although on foreign policy I'm much closer to his way of thinking, and I'm glad that Trump is more motivated by his ideas rather than Dan Crenshaw's. Now, I don't really, threatening to fight people, or it's just silly, and they shouldn't fight because they're both, well,
Is that not how you rule when there are debates in the reason?
I wound with my words.
You do, not with your fists. You're a lover, not a fighter, really, Robin.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Now, I saw a lot of speculation, it's sort of along the lines of those things with, like, would you rather fight 100 bear-sized rats or one rat-sized bear, that kind of thing. Who would win in a fight, Dan Crenshaw or Tucker Carlson? And even a lot of people who vastly prefer Tucker Carlson should concede that Dan Crenshaw is a much younger man, is a more intimidating physical presence. I have no doubt who would win that fight. Now, Tucker isn't out there claiming that he would be able to score some knockout blow. Again, he also has succeeded in the realm of political commentary. So, but who would win in a fight is a very juvenile, admittedly fun sort of thought exercise to carry about with.
No, it is fun. I think the answer is pretty clearly Crenshaw. Yeah. But the point about it is that these kind of exchanges, which I sense are becoming more common in political discourse, they are a bit juvenile. They are representative, I think, of how all these debates have become kind of more theatrical in some ways, or had a bit more of a sort of WWE kind of
yeah, there was the whole Musk versus Zuckerberg. Remember when they were going to maybe fight?
They were going to fight.
You would not have wanted to fight Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg does jiu-jitsu training and surfing. He has gotten in incredibly good. He has this kind of nerd vibe about him that's from kind of a long time. Is out of date now. He's moved from nerd to bro.
And
I would not want to fight him.
A bit pudgy looking these days. So
He's
we
just
also
an older man.
favor Zuckerberg in that matchup.
When you get to be an older man, I feel like I'm an older man now. I'm 36. I don't want to be fighting no people in some street brawls anymore.
Yeah, well,
not that I ever really did.
No, well, it's a fair point. But I do think that the propensity of these things to pop up with more frequency is just kind of representative of where we are. I don't want to be too sanctimonious about it, because it is kind of amusing, but it certainly is not really very salient to the, there's a genuinely important question about what the United States does about Ukraine, which seems to be the fundamental schism from which this has emanated. But anyway, my money.
We can solve it like the end of Dune, where Paul Atreides and the Harkonnen kid have to Fade Rotha have to fight to the death, and whoever wins gets to control the fate of the Imperium.
Unlike your usual references to Game of Thrones, that's a reference I actually understand.
Hey, how about that?
We're making progress here.
Well, we're going to be having some very serious discussion of a nerdy subject, but I think not until tomorrow, about some changes in the Star Wars universe. Big news this morning that you all know I am going to want to weigh in on, but we will get to that tomorrow. In the meantime, that does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while we're on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. See you back here tomorrow.